Alrighty, welcome, Mush Eaters, to another Army review for Total War Napoleon American Civil War 2. The mod, of course. And today we're going to be looking at the Second Corps Army of the Potomac as it arrived at the Peninsula Campaign. So, we have, when we're looking at the Second Corps, and most importantly, the Army of the Potomac at this time frame, we know was complete. It was at full strength, or as close as any army is going to get towards the time period. More than 120,000 men. Just an absolute waste that McClellan misused them. But one of the really excellent and interesting things that we get to know and that we get to look at is that a lot of these regiments are at a full-size capacity. And of course, throughout the campaign, they suffered many attritional casualties, but we're not quite there yet. And so we're going to be taking a look at almost all of the infantry units here. There's a couple I left out for some other reasons. But we're going to look at we've got kind of General Sedgwick here. Although the Brigadier General commanding at the time was Sumner rather than Sedgwick. Well, you know, just whatever. He's the 2nd Division commander. But let's look at the 1st Division that we have that's over here. And we will... Okay. Trying to make sure that I do have some sound. Alright. So let's take a look. We have the 1st Brigade. Now, they were commanded by Brigadier General Oliver Howard, a career U.S. Army officer, fought in the American Civil War. He's a brigade commander for the Army of the Potomac. Loses his right arm, though, at Seven Pines. He gets the Medal of Honor out of it, which is fantastic. We will see him again later on, Mr. Howard, at a higher command as the war goes on. But first, let's get into the 5th New Hampshire. Now, this regiment, of all of the regiments that have fought in the conflict, sustained the greatest number of combat losses of any infantry or cavalry regiment in the Union Army, with 295 men killed and 756 wounded. So even with replacements over a 3 or a 4 year period, like these regiments would only top out at somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 men, maybe a little less, depending. That is an enormous amount of casualties. So, is this, when we look at the 2nd Corps, are any of these units going to be kind of befitting of their reputation? I mean, we'll see. It's the early days yet. So, let's take a look at the 5th New Hampshire, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Langley, bringing 470 men to the battlefield. They've got rifles. Their accuracy and reloading skill is 21-22. Their melee attack is very lackluster at 9, but their charge bonus is 20. But their defense and their morale is 8 and 10. Oh my goodness. Excuse my yawn here. But that's just not quite up to snuff. Maybe give these guys some chevrons, I guess, if we're going to bring them. But there's just other units you can bring that are going to be a little bit better. But this early corps has, you know, they don't have some of the stats that they do in kind of later era armies. So next up is the 81st Pennsylvania. Now this is the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps, commanded by Colonel Johnson, bringing 656 men, rifles, 21-22, 8-20, 9-10. Very similar. Very similar. All right. Next up is the 61st New York, the Astor Regiment, as they were known in the Union Army, commanded by Colonel Channing Barlow, bringing 336 men. Accuracy, they've got rifles, 21, 22, 9, 20, 8, and 10, which is fine, but, you know, they're a little low. They're a little on the small size. Even if you take the competitive multiplayer scene that this game has, and they reduce, I think, by like 1/3 the regiment sizes. And I don't play on the competitive scene for the obvious reason that if I wanted to play with small regiment sizes, I would just play the regular Total War games. So I'm glad that they have these split options for those of us who care. All right. Next up is... Oh, no, we just did the 61st. We've got the 64th New York, commanded by Colonel Parker, bringing 316 men to the battlefield. They've got rifles, that familiar 21-22, 9-20, slightly better defense and morale at 10 and 10. It's fine. Maybe a skip, though. If you're going to be playing on the large regiment sizes, you want the bigger, the better. You could save a lot of money by getting rid of these guys and replacing them with another 2 regiments that are kind of equal size mostly. So, all right. Next up is the famous 2nd Brigade of the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps, commanded by Brigadier General Thomas Francis Meagher. He was an Irish nationalist who fought for the Union. He was part of the rebellion in 1848 against the British Crown. Comes to the United States by escaping Australia. Welcome, boys. And kind of gets into the New York scene and becomes a powerful politician. Ends up becoming a brigadier general, leads the Irish Brigade, which is kind of before you now. Unfortunately, he does not do well. Or I should say, kind of after the war, he doesn't really do well. Just dies. So, or at least we think he dies. And yeah, gets sick and die. So, or he drowns. I mean, here's the thing, guys. When it comes to early territorial governors, they did not have a very long lifespan back then. If it was not being murdered by natives or getting into a conflict or a war, it might have been murdered by civilians or citizens. I mean, there's just so much that happens. Oh my goodness. All right, so let's take a look. We've got the 69th New York, very famous regiment with Colonel Robert Nugent commanding. These guys are from New York City and the part of the New York Army National Guard. Still to this day, it is known as the Fighting 69th. And these guys just perform so well throughout the entire conflict. In fact, their whole brigade does, becoming very famous at Antietam. They are bringing 520 men to the battlefield. They don't have rifles. Straight up. And that means that you have to get twice as close. And whenever I bring the Irish Brigade, I make sure that they are in the woods, duking it out with people. Maybe give them some chevrons, but I do not want them fighting on open ground. You can use them as a second line of defense, so if the first guys break and run, you've got these guys in reserve to kind of push the attack back at them. But their stats are fantastic, other than the range. So the range is just 85. So if you've got rifles with 170 or 165, kind of depending, or 150, that range of 85 can be really devastating. But in retrospect, is very devastating to the enemy. Now, their accuracy is 28, and their reloading skill is 29, so they're going to be doing quite well for themselves. They do have a low ammunition count of 20. Their melee attack and charge bonus is 12 and 22, and their defense is 12, and their morale is 13. So just a few chevrons, and you can turn these guys into elite troops, which is very nice to have for this brigade if you wanted to go that direction. All right, next up is the 63rd New York, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel John Burke. Also part of the Irish Brigade, of course. A well-established intense fighting unit. Fought at the 7 Days Battles, which is what we're looking at. But they go on to fight all the way through to the Appomattox Campaign. Just a legendary regiment. And then when the devs finally do get to the Appomattox Campaign, it's going to be very interesting to see these very low regiment count numbers, but these very high numbers of, you know, like their melee attack is going to be like freaking 30 or whatever. So, all right, let's take a look at these guys. Bring in 536 men to the battlefield, range of 85, accuracy of 28, reloading skill of 29, ammunition of 20, melee and charge is 12-22, and defense and morale is 12 each. Now, these guys have a very long history, combat history, so I'm not going to get into it. We're just going to keep moving along. We've got a lot to cover with this corps. Next up is the 88th New York with Colonel Henry M. Baker commanding, bringing 526 men to the battlefield. Of course, they also have a limited range of 85, that accuracy and reload, 28-29. Melee attack and charge, 12-28. Defense and morale, 12 each. All right. The 29th Massachusetts, I don't think was actively part of the 2nd Brigade at this time, but they get added later, so we'll just run with it. Commanded by Colonel Ebenezer Pierce, 660 men. Of course, they also have the non-rifled weapons, something to remember. Accuracy, reloading, 28-29, ammunition 20, melee attack and charge bonus is 12 and 22. Excellent. These guys are going to be great for punching through enemy lines. Defense and morale, 12 and 13. In fact, if you took 2 chevrons and put them on each, these guys would be awesome. And it's essentially the cost of just one regiment you could remove. All right. Let's move on to the 3rd Brigade. We've got the 52nd New York over here, commanded by Colonel Paul Frank. Now, these bad boys were mustered in for 3-year service in 1861. But, of course, like many other regiments, a lot of the boys re-enlist and see through to the end of the war at Appomattox. Just a absolute huge number of battles fought in from a lot of these units. They've got rifled weapons, bringing 308 men to the battlefield. Accuracy and reloading skill, 21-22, pretty low. Ammunition of 40. That melee attack and charge bonus of 9 and 20. And defense of 20 and a morale at 20 now. Just when you look at these, man, it really puts it in perspective how good one regiment coming up against another regiment can actually be. Alrighty. Unfortunately, I don't think... Yeah. I know some of the old... These guys have corps badges on before there were corps badges, but that's okay. It'd be too annoying to go through and take off all the corps badges just for an army. All right. 57th New York, commanded by Colonel Zook, bringing 476 men to the battlefield. Let's see here. Rifled weapons, accuracy and reload of 20 and 22. Melee and charge of 8 and 20. Defense of 9 and morale of 10. Now, these guys don't quite make it all the way to the battle or to the end of the war. Very close, though, but long service in the Second Corps. Great warriors at that. Well, or I should say they will be. Next up is the 66th New York, commanded by Colonel Pickney, bringing 514 men to the battlefield, range of 170, accuracy of 20, 22, melee attack of 8, charge bonus of 20, defense 9, morale 10. We're kind of seeing something. They've got these very nice themed large regiments, and of course the Confederate regiments are very equal. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them aren't. There's not too many that I think are over that 30 threshold, as in like their accuracy is over 30 and their melee and charge bonus combined is over 30. It's very regulated, which is nice, and it helps that this was one of the newest armies that was worked on and kind of published. So up next is the 53rd Pennsylvania, commanded by Colonel Brooke. 588 men, 21, 22, 8, 20, 12, and 10. So seeing that very normal kind of regimental size again with these guys. Now, they're commanded by, they're part of the 3rd Brigade with Brigadier General French, who goes on not really to make a name for himself. He wasn't bad, per se. He just wasn't great. And so he ends up, he's one of those Union generals that makes it through the first half of the war, but not the second half. So, but yeah, doesn't do too bad. So, alrighty. But there's better generals out there, which is why he doesn't make it. Okay, next up is the rather famous Pennsylvania Brigade. Now, you may be thinking, where is the 1st Brigade for the 2nd Division of Mr. Sedgwick? Well, some of these units were just not included. I'm not sure why. Maybe they were sent somewhere else or they were detached or something. But we're just going to go with what we have. So we'll be looking at the 1st Brigade with the artillery, or what little remains of the 1st Brigade, and some of the other units you can bring. All right. So we've got the 69th Pennsylvania, commanded by Colonel Owen. These guys are the 2nd Brigade, commanded by William Burns, a Brigadier General. And he does pretty well. He's a division commander at the Battle of Fredericksburg, and then he goes out west, and he's with the Army of the Cumberland with Rosecrans. But he never... Congress never really approves his promotion, and he doesn't become a corps commander. So, kind of sucks, but that's how politics works. All right, so the 69th is bringing 712 men to this battlefield. They've got rifles, but their accuracy and reload is 18 and 18. And their melee and charge is 6, 15, 5, and 9 with that defense and morale. So just awful. Just a huge, huge size of units, but the only way to make them work is you're going to have to bring them. They don't quite become the famed Pennsylvania Brigade yet. That happens during this campaign. So next up is the 71st Pennsylvania, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William G. Jones, bringing 748 men to the battlefield, accuracy of 17, reloading skill of 18, melee 6, charge bonus of 6, defense of 7, morale of 8. Not great. Oh, yeah. Got some boys with their Zouave outfits, of course. And they are the 72nd Pennsylvania, commanded by Colonel DeWitt Baxter, bringing 534 men. But solid, very similar charge bonus of 16, which is a little bit better. But kind of the same, and poorer accuracy and reloading skills. So just an absolute substandard brigade that we have here. Large in unit size, great for maybe distracting the enemy and dying, but you're going to be very poor on everything else. So, all right, next up is the 106th Pennsylvania, commanded by Colonel Moorhead, 596 men, are being brought to this battlefield with rifled weapons. 22, 21, 6, 16, 7, and 6. So they have decent charge bonuses, but not really staying power for getting the fighting done, which is going to be very noticeable when you're trying to do it. So next up, we're going to look at the 3rd Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Napoleon J.T. Dana. And of course, JT stands for Jackson Tecumseh. So this man's full name, this brigade commander, was Napoleon Jackson Tecumseh Dana. Career Army officer who fought in the Mexican-American War, was a general, of course, in the Union Army, and does not see to the end of the battlefield. He does finish. He kind of like finished his time out with the Corps, or with the Union Army. But it's he kind of just gets sent out into the middle of nowhere, and they have someone replace him. So he also becomes kind of a political casualty ultimately in the end, which is something that happens. All right, so up next is going to be the 19th Massachusetts, commanded by Colonel Hinks, bringing 742 men to the battlefield, which is quite nice. Rifled weapons, accuracy, reload, 22-22, melee attack, charge bonus, 8-20, defense and morale, 12 and 11. Not bad. Better than what we've seen. Alrighty. Now we've got the 20th Massachusetts, commanded by Colonel William Raymond Lee, bringing 814 men. Rifles, accuracy reloading, 22-22. Melee charge, 9-20. Defense morale, 11-12. A little bit better than the last brigade we saw, but not great. All right. Next up is the 7th Michigan, probably the largest regiment in this corps at this time period, commanded by Colonel Ira R. Grosvenor, bringing 1,126 men, rifled weapons. That's a lot of rifled guns to be shooting at people. Accuracy of 21, reloading skill of 22, melee of 8, charge bonus of 20. The defense and morale, pretty low, 11-11. But they're new troops, fresh off some training, so we'll see. Next up is the 42nd New York, commanded by Colonel Edmund Charles, bringing 704 men to the battlefield, a range of 170 because they've got them awesome rifles. Accuracy and reload of 22-22, melee of 9, charge bonus of 20, defense of 12, and a morale of 11, which is fine. I've got kind of those standard stats, but if they might lose to the smaller regiments that engage them that have higher morale and melee and charge bonus, right? It's just something to be kind of aware of. All right, now let's take a look at the rest of the units. We've looked at, these are all the mainline infantry units that you can select from in the 2nd Corps. And now we're going to look at some Cavs, some artillery, some scouts, and a few of the other smaller regiments. And then after that, we'll take a look at a combined army. Alrighty. Here we go, mush eaters. We've got it right here. The rest of the 2nd Corps. So I brought Brigadier General Thomas Meagher here. But here in the back, we've got 4 sets of Napoleons. So, not bad. Not great. All of their stats are the same, which is fine. They bring 6 operational guns for each one. So if you really want to support and duel it out with the enemy, then bring these Napoleons. Especially in such a heavily wooded area as this map. Now, these are all batteries. So we've got the 1st New York, Company B here. They've got 6 guns. And first, it looks like Rhode Island, Company B, 6 guns. So more than enough guns to do all of your dirty work. I think these are rifled, so yeah. Got that nice 925 range. Accuracy is a little bad. We like to see that 65 accuracy on rifled guns, but these don't have them, so it happens. All right, so next up, as you can see, there's not a lot of variation. When we look at some of the other cores, you guys are going to be like, what? They get like 8 different kinds of guns. But just the early war just wasn't there yet, so. All right, up next is the 6th New York Company's DFH and K as your only cav unit for this entire corps. Now, quite common at the beginning of the war, you're only fielding 240 men. They've got their carbines or whatever they have at 150. Their accuracy is 32, and their reloading skill is 25. Their melee attack is 22. Excellent. And their defense is 16. Their morale is 25. Incredibly high. But that charge bonus of 4 is what gets you. So let these guys get to the objective and take it, and maybe have them supported by some of these units. We've got a mix of infantry and some skirmishers. So let's take a look. Now, the first up is we've got the 34th New York. They've got 100 men. Only bring them if you're going to use them as skirmishers, I guess. And the 82nd New York with Colonel Hudson here. They have okay stats, but it's not really worth bringing for the cost and the battlefield. You can just spend it on other things. So the other 2 sections which you can use, which is really nice here, is the 2nd Corps' really strong skirmisher sections. So we've got the 7th Michigan here, 120 men. Their accuracy is pretty low, but their range is 200, which is quite nice. Yes, sir. Same with the 7th New York. And the 1st Minnesota sharpshooters right here. Highly qualified. A range of 300. An accuracy of 45. A reloading skill of 20. Man, put these guys in the back and let them go to town. How could you not? I mean, just absolutely excellent. And pair them up with the 15th Massachusetts. Oh boy. 436 men shooting at 300 range. That's perfect. Accuracy of 30, reloading skill of 20. Their morale's really low, but man, pair these 2 up with this guy, and you've got a really unique brigade that can hold its own, you know? So maybe I'll do something like that. We'll see. Alrighty. So that's it for all of the other units that we can bring. Now let's combine everything that we've looked at into a core that we might use on the battlefield. And let's take a look. Alrighty. Here we go, everybody. Welcome. Now this is the 2nd Corps as I might take it into battle. Of course, if you're playing against multiple people or if you have teammates, you might want to decide on how you want to do things. But first up, in the order of battle, we're going to have the cav go first, followed by the artillery to move up. So there's just nothing in their way, no infantry to slow them down. Excuse me. And in the front, I've got the 7th Michigan. They're 1,000 men, and 2 larger regiments on either side of them. And their job is to stretch out the battlefield so that other regiments can start poking and prodding. Specifically, these 4. I might need them to peel off to protect something, go over here, or go over here, fill in this gap, that kind of thing. Now, as far as the rest of the wings go, we've got 3 regiments in the front, all of varying sizes. 500 men, 700 men, 500 men. And then in the back, some slightly smaller regiments, 400 each, along with the 15th Massachusetts sharpshooters. want them shooting a lot of rounds downrange. And something's very similar to the other side, but with small regiments. Much, much smaller. But working with what we've got. So, 300, 300, 300, 500. Not bad. Along with the 82nd with their 170. And then the 1st Minnesota sharpshooters here. So, a much smaller division to be taking on to the battlefield. Obviously, not as large as this, which is where a lot of the manpower is. But that's something that you need to remember, is that where is your manpower, where is the enemy's manpower? These smaller units on the side, their entire job is to stay small. To stay on the move, make sure that the enemy is not getting close. And where the enemy is weakest is where the majority of this manpower is going to go. And that's just how it needs to be, especially supported with artillery and cav. You can break off a regiment, a regiment, a regiment, and send them to go help. So if this is how I was fighting, this is how I would do it with the 2nd Corps. Just with the units that they got. And of course, you can always downsize. And if you were fighting... if it was just one-on-one, you might spread your units out. But if you've got 3 other teammates, then you're going to really narrow your front because you need to fit all of the other enemy divisions that are going to be coming to fight as well. So, or friendly corps that are going to be fighting as well. Because as you can see, my battle line takes about 1/3 of the battle map up. If you're playing with 4 players, then you're going to be losing a wing, and you're going to have to reorganize your army in a way that you see fit. So, as you can see, I would be very loath to take on enemy cav, and if the enemy is bringing lots of cav, it's something that it's going to be very difficult to deal with because they'll be able to constantly move around. By the time your regiment is looking in that direction, the enemy can already be moving away and inflicting damage. That kind of thing. All right. Getting into that double quick just fine. But they're facing the wrong way. Which happens in this game sometimes. There we go. Now they're all squared away. So, just something to be aware of. Oftentimes when you're playing multiplayer against other players, artillery is the first thing that starts shooting at each other. It's the first thing that you see. And depending upon where you're at, there's not a lot of good ground for Union artillery. You can be like over here shooting through these flats or maybe up on top. But you got to be careful about hitting your units in the back. But anyway, that is the 2nd Corps, commanded by Brigadier General Sedgwick here, or at least who I have. And this is how I might bring the 2nd Corps in a battle. All right. Well, that, my friends, we're going to be moving on to the rest of the Army of the Potomac. And when we are finally done with the Army of the Potomac in years 61 and 62, we'll go and start finally looking at the Confederate armies, which I know a lot less about, but we'll be taking a look at their divisions and corps and their cavalry that they have set up. And we'll be taking a look at what they have to bring to the battlefield. Almost there. Got like 3 more reviews of the Army of the Potomac to do before we can finally move on. Oh my gosh. I'm looking to do those every couple of days now by just sitting down and doing them, because the pace at which they're coming out or being reworked is much faster than I can do. So, but with that, Mush Eaters, thank you for watching. I hope you found this interesting, at least to help guide you in your army compositions when you're looking to play against other players. Always think about chevroning your units. It's just something to think about. I know I played against one Confederate player who had nothing but cheap units that he chevroned twice. So every infantry that he brought was a small unit, but they were all chevron, so it was very hard to dislodge them from certain locations. This is kind of the complete opposite. You could not bring this regiment, the 7th Michigan. I think with its 2 chevrons, it was something like $1,400. But you could spend all of that money chevroning up these guys into more effective fighters, maybe 2 chevrons each. But then again, you know, if they come up against just a brigade of big heavy hitters, you never know which way it's going to go. Because this is a lot of guns to be shooting at once against a small brigade. So, all right, my friends, I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you for watching. You freaking crazy bush eaters. Bye-bye. Union's tears in the rain. On his word, freedom's gain. For the hurt, break the chain.